Hello, Margaret.
Hello, Bernard.
Margaret Ritchie, MP for South Down. Many distinguished predecessors. I think even Eamon de Valera had a South Down connection at one stage.
He did
didn't
indeed, way back in 1918.
Uh-huh.
And I always remember when we were canvassing for Eddie back in 1983, which seems quite a number of years ago, he made reference to that. But obviously, I think the constituency boundaries were slightly different then. But nonetheless, Eamon de Valera was a former MP, as was Eddie McGrady.
Yes.
And I never forget Eddie's famous victory in 1987 and us dancing in the courtyard of the school in Dromore. It was quite phenomenal what happened then.
It's quite a thing to become an MP for an area. I mean, I'm sure it takes up 24/7 practically, I'm sure.
It does indeed.
Yeah.
It's 24/7, it's 7 days a week. Very little social time.
Yeah.
And obviously I love doing that job.
Yeah.
I'm putting myself forward again. I made my application to the party. The selection convention will take place sometime after Christmas. Subject to my selection, I'll be putting myself in front of the electorate in South Down on all the issues that matter to them, because on a cross-community basis I will be offering myself. The people of South Down want an MP who's going to deliver for them, whether it's in agriculture or fisheries or whatever.
Margaret, you hear in politics that you always declare your interests. I have to declare that you and I, our paths met many, many years ago when we were much younger than we are today.
Absolutely, and that seems quite a number of years ago.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of water under the bridge.
Yeah.
Separately.
I think we were in similar sorts of situations. I was a researcher in the SDLP head office in University Street.
That's right.
And you were working for Eddie McGrady at that stage?
Not at all. I was simply a party member.
Okay.
I was a member of the Central Executive.
Yeah.
And in 1985, then I became a councillor for the SDLP.
Right.
I went to work for Eddie on his election in August 1987.
Right. You're one of these people that went to university and then got involved in party politics, and you had almost a seamless evolution in terms of getting involved in politics. First of all, what did you study at Queen's?
Well, at Queen's I studied geography and political science.
Oh, right.
And I never wanted to pursue politics
Right.
in that sort of academic sense. I always wanted to be a teacher, but at that stage they weren't taking arts graduates for postgraduate certificates in education. So I did a few odd jobs in terms of administration, but none that were terribly challenging. And so I decided, look, I'm going to do something. I had an interest in politics, joined the SDLP post-graduation from university, and quickly when you join a local branch you get lots of jobs like branch secretary, and then I was elected in 1982 to the SDLP Central Executive, and then I was elected to Down District Council in 1985, and on successive elections after that on a 4-year basis. I've been chairman and vice chairman of Down District Council. Party's International Secretary, was elected to the Forum for Political Dialogue, which was about entry to negotiations in 1996. We had a short-lived existence in the Forum for Political Dialogue because Garvaghey Road intervened. The police made, at that stage, a fairly bad decision that, and as a consequence of that, we withdrew from the Forum. But then I was elected to the Assembly in 2003, replacing Eddie in the Assembly.
Well, sometimes politics chooses us. We don't always choose politics. I actually didn't go into politics myself. I ended up in the world of journalism and went off to Europe and spent quite a bit of time there. You stayed here and you got totally, as you're outlining now, totally enmeshed in politics, and you've had an amazing sort of evolution. You were, I think, a researcher for Eddie McGrady.
That's right, yeah.
The former MP for South Down as well. You've been a government minister.
That's right.
You're now an MP for South Down.
And a short-lived party leader.
Yes, a party leader, but the SDLP has had a tradition of short-lived leaders.
Yes.
We'll come to that later on, actually. But it's quite a CV. You've been a councillor, obviously, as well. So you've had you know, and you're still a relatively young woman, if you don't mind me saying.
Thank you very much, yes.
And you know, you're going over to Westminster, I'm sure, what, once a week or a couple of days a week?
Well, I go over on a Monday normally and come back on a Wednesday.
Yeah.
Now, last week I had to make 2 different journeys to Westminster, and because there was my week was punctuated with lots of constituency meetings, and my constituents in South Down, right across the community, come first for me.
Okay.
And that means so much. I had to come back for an event in Kilkeel, which was to do with the launch of Kilkeel Harbour Works, a combination of engineering and maritime works, about the redevelopment of Kilkeel Harbour to allow greater facilitation of votes. And I would definitely be first and foremost a constituency person.
Margaret, when I knew you back in the early days, back in the 80s, politics had a different flavour in this part of the world compared to where it's at now. And the SDLP was a different, if you don't mind me saying so, a different animal then. And it had some very big beasts, John Hume, Seamus Mallon, your close associate Eddie McGrady, Bridge Rogers. There were very, very almost overwhelming political figures. It's a much more, there's a much larger range and diversity of people within the SDLP now. You closely worked with Eddie, and Eddie, you mentioned constituency issues. And one constituency issue, I would like to talk a lot about a number of things in the political climate in terms of where we're at now. But there was one issue that Eddie McGrady campaigned on vigorously, was the issue of Sellafield and the whole radiation leak thing. You're now taking up the gauntlet on that. Can you explain a little bit about where that issue is at, and what you're doing with it at this point in time?
Our major problem with Sellafield was the indiscriminate discharges of radioactive waste from Sellafield into the Irish Sea, and as a consequence of that, the impact on our local environment on the South Down, East Down coast. Sellafield to us marks a major exchequer for the British government. Sellafield is the nuclear industry, and despite many problems that the British government and the then British Nuclear Fuels encountered with Sellafield, they kept building that infrastructure. And in fact, I visited Sellafield on 2 separate occasions.
And survived?
And survived, yes. Back in the late 80s, 1990s, they built 2 plants, the mixed oxide plant and also the Thorpe thermal reprocessing plant. Now, they were meant to be short-lived, and they were to be scheduled to be closed down and properly decommissioned in the next one 2012 and one 2016. Neither have been closed down, neither have been decommissioned. So it just shows you what the nuclear industry is. It just keeps growing and growing. Another issue in relation to Sellafield, and this is quite a recent one, the Nuclear Decommissioning Agency was established to do a clean-up job at Sellafield, and that was, it in fact was to cost something like £6 billion. In fact, that figure has been largely surpassed, and they haven't been able to do the job. Only a few weeks ago, they found isolated ponds that had been discarded, full of radioactive waste.
Ponds in the local area? Or,
in the plant.
Yes.
When you go into a plant where they are doing reprocessing of radioactive waste, you find these large ponds of water which are radioactive. They have radioactive waste in them. So they abandoned a couple of those. And only a couple of weeks ago, we were told that radioactive particles were found in the beach at Sellafield. Further to that, the British government has now embarked on a new nuclear programme, and the European Commission about 2 months ago gave approval for a new nuclear plant at Hinkley Point in Somerset. Obviously the Irish government weren't happy about that particular point, nuclear plant, but it was approved by the European Commission. The second issue is that marks a new programme of new build, which will also include Sellafield again, and the next plant will probably be at a place called Moortown, which is adjacent to Sellafield.
Look, the Sellafield thing has been going on and on. It started sometime in the 50s, and it was then called Windscale,
That's
and
right.
they changed the name basically on some kind of public relations
To clean it up.
exercise to clean up the image.
Yes.
But far from the image being cleaned up, there is just an ongoing history. Now, there are clusters of leukemia and cancers all along the eastern seaboard of Ireland, north and south. Would you attribute, or can it be evidentially attributed that Sellafield is one of the causal factors?
There are obviously a lot of local concerns about that particular issue. So far, we have yet to see the actual evidential base that shows there is a correlation between the indiscriminate discharges of radioactive waste from Sellafield into the Irish Sea and the clusters of leukemia and the clusters of cancer. Obviously, much more research is required into that, and that is a matter that I will be pursuing again, because the last research that was carried out was undertaken for Down District Council a way back in about 1986-87, and it was difficult to have that causal connection. But I think now, because of a rise in cancers yet again, proportionate to the amount of population, there is a need to do that.
And of course, we live in a very uncertain world. We have a very unstable political landscape throughout the world. We're constantly told about the problems of various forms of Islamic activity and things like that. The post 9/11 era.
Yeah.
The combination of these nuclear installations and some kind of activity by some of the new groups that have emerged in the Middle East now just doesn't bear thinking about.
Absolutely not. And we have to think of those in terms of terrorist attacks. Living close by to a like Sellafield, to any nuclear plant which has the potential for an accident to happen. And the other important point is that Sellafield is directly on a major fault, geological fault line, which has links directly over to the Mournes across the Irish Sea. So we have to think about that issue in relation to any Islamic or potential Islamic attack. But to be quite honest, Bernard, I wouldn't want to dwell too much upon that.
Well, those are nightmare scenarios, and we don't want to cause undue concern to people.
But the important thing on all of that is we still want to see Sellafield properly decommissioned, properly cleaned up, and eventually closed.
Okay.
And there must be a concentration on renewables. After all, the British government did give that commitment.
So, Margaret, yourself and your party, the SDLP, are you going to be spearheading a renewed campaign on Sellafield?
That campaign continues, Bernard, because there are new issues that emerge all the time in relation to the nuclear industry. You had it with Hinkley Point, you have it with Wilfa on the Welsh coast, you have it with Dounreay in the north of Scotland, and also with Sellafield. And the fact that decommissioning is costing a massive amount of money, more than was originally envisaged, more than was originally allocated, and it is draining the British Exchequer.
Well, as many ventures
Yes.
in recent years that Britain has got involved in has drained. We'll not go into the various wars they've got involved in, but there seems to be endless amounts of money for certain negative activities, and when it comes to real human needs, they're not getting met.
They're secondary.
Okay, and that's where we need to reorientate politics, I think. It's very interesting now, as I said, Eddie, I'm glad you're taking up that particular baton again, but there are a whole series of issues. Obviously, as a constituency MP for South Down, you have to be also concerned about what's happening in Newry Mourne and other parts of South Down, Downpatrick. So what is the situation with the development of infrastructure? I was talking to Danny Kennedy, the roads minister, earlier today, and we were talking about water, the NI water. We were talking about the floods issue. We were talking about road schemes. Have you any you must, as an MP, have to take an aerial view of all those kind of issues?
Obviously, I have to take an aerial strategic view, but I also have to deal with the concerns of my constituents. And I think these are bigger strategic issues. And it goes back to the budget that the Assembly was presented with as a result of the Comprehensive Spending Review back in 2011, which meant that there was a 1.6% reduction in the block grant for Northern Ireland that would see a downturn in the amount of money available to us in year 3 to 4 of that budget. And now we're seeing that. Back then in 2010 and 11, when I was a member of the Assembly as well, we put forward a motion, that is the SDLP, asking, we were opposed to that budget. And might I add, the only party to be opposed, because we foresaw what is now happening. And we asked for immediate discussions to take place with the Exchequer and the British government, and secondly, for an annual review of the budget to take place, so that we saw, the Assembly and the Executive saw quite clearly how the money was being spent, how much money was left, and what were the yearly, annual requirements and priorities in terms of health, education, roads, infrastructure. Now we see what is happening. You see major crisis in health. I can look in Downpatrick. We are losing 9 beds in coronary care, which undermines the very hospital infrastructure. And in fact, the Minister for Health has just kept the minor injuries unit in Bangor opened. The very conditions that he has used to keep that open should be used to keep the hospital in Downpatrick with a coronary care base.
So the health issue is probably one particular issue that you would focus in.
Very much so.
Yeah,
in fact, Daisy Hill, whilst getting new infrastructure in Daisy Hill, and I believe it requires a replacement hospital at some stage, and I have already put that in as a submission to Minister Wells, but I also believe that as an interim measure, and in an interim to long-term measure, the stroke unit must not be centralised in Craigavon. It must remain in Daisy Hill.
Margaret, the All-Ireland agenda is a central plank of SDLP policy.
Yes.
And I know reconciliation between the two communities here is a central plank. With money becoming tight, with what I sometimes have referred to as subvention shrinkage,
Yes, very definitely, yeah.
affecting this region, is one way, can we increase the cross-border dimension in areas like health? And, you know, there is a certain amount of cooperation in electricity generation, but shouldn't hospitals, and I did see the move towards the hospital, the cooperation on children's healthcare,
That's right.
Belfast and Dublin. Can we not increase that kind of cross-border cooperation on a practical level without impinging on anybody's identity or whatever, to maximise what we get for our money in terms of public services?
It makes good economic and good health sense to do so, and that already takes place, because in terms of paediatrics, which Daisy Hill was renowned for, there were quite a number of children who would be treated from County Louth in Daisy Hill, and I think that is a welcome development. I think if I cast my mind back to 1998, whenever the Good Friday Agreement was signed, the SDLP's plank was achieved at that stage, because we got equal rights for all. We got North-South, the Irish dimension. We got peace and power sharing. As a consequence of that, we now need to look at 4 new areas. And those four new areas, one is a prosperity agenda for everybody that is fair and equal to all. And that means balanced regional development and balanced health and medical provision. The second area is good government. As it currently stands, we don't have good government.
Well, we're basically into, I know the Good Friday Agreement wasn't, it was the beginning of a process.
It was a framework.
It wasn't the end of a process. It's been an experiment, it's been an exploration, it's been a journey, but we certainly seem to have arrived at a major bump in the road in terms of that journey. And it does seem that,
excuse me,
and I know that your party, the SDLP, invested huge energy, the Humes-Adams process and all of that, invested in a peace process that contributed to the outcome of the Good Friday Agreement. But politics here seems to have almost grinded into a very almost a static kind of retrogressive kind of position. I know there are thinking, and there are politicians talking about electoral pacts across even the identity lines, and I know there's talk about the possibility of opposition politics up in Stormont. How do you see us getting out of the impasse we're in? What is the resolution to the bump or the roadblock on the road.
If I could maybe give some characterisation, I've been talking to constituents right through from the length and breadth of South Down, which is really from Crossgar to Newry and from Newcastle to Banbridge. Very large rural constituency with 10 settlements, and people generally feel pretty cheesed off at the door. They don't see the Northern Ireland Executive delivering for them in terms of health, in terms of education, roads, infrastructure, and it comes back to that basic issue of the budget and the lack of agreement around the executive table. But they want to see delivery. They don't see the current they see a current impasse. They don't see much actually emanating out of the current talks process, but we have to be positive in that direction, because we have to see a resolution in terms of, shall we say, victims, the past, flags and parades. But on general day-to-day living, people see two parties at the centre copper-fasting their own electoral basis simply for political advantage rather than for delivery for people. Because when I go to a door, it's about their housing issue that they want a resolution, their benefit, their planning one. It's what matters to the person themselves, their child's education.
Margaret, could it be said that perhaps the experiment, the 15-year-long experiment now, has possibly failed, and that we must look at reconfiguring the process? We do seem to be in a situation where there seems to be a lack of creative thinking, but is it, you know, your party is involved in soundings and relationships with the likes of the Ulster Unionist Party. There's always the prospect of direct rule coming back into the fore. Is the political process up in Stormont, is it really working? Is it, I mean, people in the street are wondering, look, what is this? What's in this for me? And with the welfare reform and, as I say, the subvention shrinkage and developments elsewhere, like Scotland has opened up a whole different nature of politics in the rest of the United Kingdom. Politics in the Republic have, after many years of austerity, there now seems to be a vigorous energy surrounding issues like water charges and the very nature of governance in the Republic. Perhaps we need to be part of that broader world instead of looking inwards.
Well, rather than look inwards, I suppose we should be looking outwards. And I think there are 4 principles as a consequence of the agreement we should now be looking on. How do you build that prosperity agenda that is equal and fair to all? How do you build reconciliation, which is the central plank of the SDLP, to build a reconciled people on the island of Ireland? The third area is the one you referred to previously, the issue of good government. How do you create good government? And we need to go back and look at that. Good government is about delivering for people on the whole range of issues. Ask ourselves, is government delivering at the moment? I don't think so. And the final area is the Irish dimension. We need to build in those north-south bodies, and it's about a pathway to unity. And I think we need to look at all of that, refocus the debate. You mentioned direct rule. I don't think at a time when they're talking about giving extra powers to Scotland, when they're talking about English votes for English MPs and a possible vote on that prior to Christmas in the House of Commons, I don't see direct rule coming back to Northern Ireland.
We're going to see the super councils coming in March, April 2015. There's a general election.
Yes,
that's
in
going
7th of May.
In May, which the outcome from which could be a game changer, a milestone election in terms of British and UK constitutional history. As I said, the Republic is going through dramatic changes as well. The European Union, which has been a backdrop for many years, it also is at a crossroads in terms of what it's doing, where it's going, and has actually fallen into a kind of an agency of austerity. Perhaps could the super councils be somewhere that we could devolve more power and responsibility to? And could we look at, how do we actually configure our identities here? Scotland is somewhere that both communities in this part of the world have a kind of close relationship with. Obviously, we have a broad Ulster identity. Is there innovative and creative thinking that a party like the SDLP can actually bring to the table? Like, the SDLP was a party of a big idea. It came out of the civil rights movement. Is it time the SDLP, maybe in conjunction with some other local politicians, reinvigorated the big idea, you know, the notion of a kind of civil rights in a more vigorous and powerful way?
Well, I think that comes back to the whole issue of the prosperity agenda, how in the terms for reconciliation. And I know that whenever I was Minister for Social Development, it was about ensuring how people could come and live together rather than living apart, and try to address the issue of a divided society. I think that has yet to be divided. To be addressed. And the other morning I heard on the radio about possible walls coming down in Belfast. That issue has to be, the mindset of the walls in people's minds, and the walls, the physical structures, that has to be addressed. So we're now in the next stage, and obviously there's work to do on a cross-party basis to address those issues. But we have to increase the pound in the pocket for the people.
Of course, of
and
course.
I think that's the most important.
How are we going to do that, Margaret?
Well,
in terms of our local economy, this economy here, this region, Northern Ireland, is very heavily dependent on
the
public sector.
Yeah.
And the public, I mentioned this word, subvention shrinkage. That is the reality. The money from Westminster is going to be reduced. So,
well, I want to see, for example, an incentive for the British government to do just that. And I've been campaigning for some time about the need to reduce VAT on tourism. Currently in the south of Ireland, notwithstanding austerity measures, and notwithstanding that deep period of austerity measures, they reduced VAT on a pilot basis for 9% some 2 or 3 years ago, and they repeated that on an annual basis, and they again implemented a 9%. Here in the north, some 12 miles down the road, it is 20%, the same as parts of Britain. Now, can you just imagine it? Air passenger duty is nil for coming into Dublin. It is much higher if you're flying into Belfast. That has an immediate impact on our income levels. And the amount of people spend in tourism products. Tourism is one of our principal economic drivers in this part of the world.
Fishing could be as well.
Exactly, with the Mournes, with St Patrick's Country, with Slieve Gullion. That needs to be addressed by the Chancellor in the autumn statement this week.
Can I also say to you that, again, as I say, the SDLP was a big ideas party in the past. It came out of the civil rights movement. Ideas for more progressive social policies, like more pervasive social enterprise, more can-do attitude at a local level. Maybe we can't rely on Westminster government or
and we still believe in that.
The EU or some external saviour. I think what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, you would like to see economic and other sort of rules and regulations harmonised with the rest of the island.
Very much so.
And if Scotland there's more devolved power, we can integrate and make sure we're not overly competing with Scotland. Greater cooperation between the rest of the island, and perhaps even between Ireland and Scotland.
Well, there could well be areas there for to look at, but I suppose at this stage I would like to see areas of harmonisation and reconciliation on the island.
So integration and harmonising economic factors
on the island,
and reconciling, and in practical terms, how are you going to promote that reconciliation process?
I think the first thing I mentioned it earlier, how do that's one area that has not been properly addressed. Power sharing was to bring that about, but instead we have two parties that act like monoliths trying to underpin their electoral basis. We have to ensure that we put forward our strategy as the SDLP by building on that prosperity agenda, by building on reconciliation, ensuring we address the problems of a divided society, people living apart. How do we get people living together? And when I was Minister for Social Development, did have some successes in terms of shared housing estates. Also the whole area of good government, to prove to people out there that government does work. Please vote for us. Please vote for a party of moderation, but please vote for a party of delivery on the ground that puts the needs of people first, whether it's health, education, infrastructure, roads, increases the pound in their pocket, and also builds that pathway to unity that brings about economic reconciliation on the island.
Can I be a devil's advocate?
Oh, I'm sure you will be.
Does the South really want to be integrated and harmonised with the North? I think would be fair to say the South in some ways has moved on, and I mean even they've rechristened themselves Ireland. They refer to the south of Ireland as Ireland, and to some extent that indicates a kind of almost a separation of minds from the two parts of Ireland. Is the Southern government a good partner for the process that you're advocating?
Well, I still believe it is, and I still think there needs to be concentration on building the North-South bodies, and because they have been allowed to be dormant by the DUP and Sinn Féin as a part of their directives in leading government. Being absolutely no doubt about it. There was a review of North-South carried out 7 years ago that was quite positive, and they allowed it to die.
I was in Armagh the other day, and the cross-border body in Armagh, somebody was saying to me, the building, which is a beautiful building, it's a fine state-of-the-art building, but somebody was saying to me, basically, there's virtually next to no activity going on. And that seems to me a slightly sad, forlorn metaphor for North-South energised.
Again, it goes back to the DUP Sinn Féin-led executive. What I say to the public is, give the SDLP that opportunity to be back at the centre of government, because we have good ideas. We produced 2 economic plans some 5-6 years ago without ever introducing punitive measures like water charges or raising rates, to which we're totally opposed to.
And you're against water privatisation?
Absolutely, always have been, we still are, because that is not the road to go down. You cannot create good government by penalising people. You have to involve people and show that you have a benevolent, good side, and you take the interests of the electorate first.
Margaret, just to slightly to move towards conclusion, because I'm conscious of you're a very busy constituency member of Parliament, so I can imagine your time is very valuable. We started off talking about Sellafield. It seems that a lot of what you're talking about, harmonisation, integration, reconciliation, these are all technical and very involved work. But it sounds that something like campaigning on Sellafield could be the kind of imaginative big campaign and one of the sort of big idea politics that the SDLP may kind of reinvigorate itself with? Well,
the SDLP has always been interested in good environmental management and ensuring that the people of this island, people of the north, the people of Southdown can live unhindered, and that they can ensure that they are contamination free.
Right.
And I think that means your land, your landscape, your environment, and that you're not exposed to any form of radiation.
And dare I say, could it be the sort of issue that would allow the SDLP to radiate energy and maybe achieve decommissioning?
Well, that is one way, to pardon the pun, a possibility. But I can tell you, here and now, the British government has put great store in terms of the exchequer and the amount of money it gets out of Sellafield, that it will get out of Hinkley Point, rather than in reinvesting in renewable technologies and renewable energy. And that is the road we must go down. We cannot allow our landscape to be destroyed by toxic chemicals, and that refers to either from across the Irish Sea or from elsewhere.
I think that's a very positive note, Margaret, and I think it's a worthy one. We could talk on and on.
Absolutely.
There's only so much time in any interview.
Yeah. And I want, obviously, Bernard, to have the opportunity to continue building that infrastructure from the northern end of Southdown to the southern end, and that includes farming and fishing, to include increase the incomes of those people, and also to ensure that the economy is rebalanced and that we have a sound local health and medical service that is based on the principles of equity of access for all, and also local accessibility to services at the point of delivery.
Margaret, it's been a great pleasure meeting up with you again.
Thank you, Bernard. Thank you very much.